The sun was just beginning to rise over the Pacific, painting the horizon with streaks of gold and blood red. Somewhere over a small atoll in the South Pacific, a lone B-25 Mitchell bomber sat on the tarmac, its engines humming quietly, waiting for a mission that would soon become legendary. On the ground, mechanics moved with practiced precision, checking every bolt, every rivet, and every panel. But there was one mechanic who had a secret, a daring, dangerous secret that would soon change the course of a battle and leave the Japanese forces reeling. His name was Jack Thompson, a young but fiercely talented mechanic who had been tinkering with aircraft since he could lift a wrench. Unlike other mechanics who followed orders to the letter, Jack had a mind that never stopped moving, a mind that could see the hidden potential in machines that others couldn't. He had grown up around engines, in a dusty garage far from the front lines, learning the language of pistons, propellers, and gears. But here, in the chaos of war, that childhood passion would take on a lethal purpose. The B-25 he was assigned to wasn't anything special on paper. Standard armament, standard armor, standard everything. But Jack saw something in it that no one else did a chance to bend the rules, to push beyond the limits, to create something the manuals warned against but the enemy would never forget. He had spent weeks secretly designing an upgrade, a modification so audacious that if anyone in the chain of command had seen it, he would have been court-martialed on the spot. But he wasn't thinking about the rules. He was thinking about survival and victory. Jack's plan was deceptively simple in concept, but insanely risky in execution. The standard B-25 carried a mix of defensive and offensive guns, but Jack wanted to turn it into a flying hammer, a machine that could rain fire on enemy positions with a level of efficiency no conventional bomber could achieve. He reinforced the nose with armor plating salvaged from old wrecks and jury-rigged a battery of extra forward-firing, 50-caliber guns. Each gun was meticulously aligned, tested, and balanced, so the plane could unleash a fusillade of bullets with terrifying precision. He also tinkered with the bomb release system, modifying it to carry more payloads than regulations allowed. Every modification was done in secret, under the dim glow of lanterns in the hangar, while officers believed he was merely performing routine maintenance. Friends and fellow mechanics whispered about what he was doing. Some thought it was reckless, others thought it was brilliant, but no one could deny his skill. By the time the plane was ready, it was no longer just a B-25. It was a weapon of unprecedented destruction, a machine built for one man's vision and one man's determination to turn the tide of a battle. But Jack didn't do it for glory. He had seen too much death, too many friends ripped apart in the endless Pacific campaigns. He did it because he understood one cold, unshakable truth of war. The side that strikes first and strikes hardest often survives. And in that quiet hangar, filled with the smell of oil and the echo of distant gunfire, Jack Thompson was preparing to deliver a strike that would leave an indelible mark on history. When the mission was finally assigned, the target was a heavily fortified Japanese airfield on a remote island. Intelligence had confirmed troop concentrations, supply depots, and anti-aircraft positions. Any normal squadron would approach cautiously, strike quickly, and hope to survive. But Jack's modified B-25 wasn't a normal bomber. It was a predator, built to tear through defenses that would have stopped anything else in its path. And Jack would be at the controls, not as a pilot, but as the mechanic who knew the plane better than anyone, the man who had coaxed it beyond every limit. As the bomber taxied down the runway, Jack took a deep breath. He thought of his friends, his family back home, the long nights in the hangar, and the countless hours of risk and calculation. Every adjustment, every secret weld, every extra gun was about to be put to the ultimate test. The engines roared to life, and with a shudder and a surge, the B-25 lifted into the sky, climbing steadily toward its destiny. Flying over the endless blue of the Pacific, the calm surface of the water belied the chaos waiting below. The Japanese soldiers had no idea that a single bomber, modified in secret by a mechanic they would never know, was approaching their base. Jack's heart pounded in rhythm with the engines, but he felt a strange calm as well. This was what he had prepared for. This was why he had risked everything. Below, the island stretched out like a miniature fortress, dotted with bunkers, barracks, and anti-aircraft emplacements. From hundreds of feet above, it looked peaceful, almost serene. but Jack knew better. In just minutes, that serenity would be shattered. And when it was, no one would question whether the B-25 was capable. The proof would be in the firestorm he was about to unleash. As the plane approached the target, Jack checked every gauge, every trigger, every modified control. This was the moment where preparation met opportunity. He was about to demonstrate what one man's ingenuity, courage, and defiance of regulations could accomplish. And though he had no way of knowing it yet, in just 15 minutes, the world would witness a strike so devastating it would be remembered for decades, a strike that would eliminate thousands of enemy forces and etch the name of an unassuming mechanic into the annals of history. Jack's hands tightened on the controls. The runway, the hangar, the countless hours of secret work, they all led to this instant. And as the B-25 dove toward the enemy base, silent anticipation filled the cockpit. What happened next would not just change a battle. It would redefine what a single aircraft, in the hands of someone who dared to defy the rules, could achieve. The B-25 sliced through the morning sky, its engines screaming over the turquoise Pacific. From above, the island looked deceptively small, almost quaint, but Jack knew better. Every inch of that ground was crawling with enemy soldiers, machine guns, and artillery ready to tear the plane apart the moment it appeared. Yet, up here, 10,000 feet above the ocean, Jack felt a surge of focus. Every gun, every bomb, every modification he had made was about to prove its worth. He eased the plane into a shallow dive, the nose lined perfectly with the first row of bunkers. The extra guns roared to life, spitting fire with a speed and precision the Japanese had never faced. Bullets tore through wooden structures, sandbags, and enemy positions, shredding defenses that would have withstood any conventional assault. Soldiers scrambled, screaming in shock, unable to comprehend the hail of metal raining down from a single bomber. Jack's modifications weren't just about brute force, they were about control. The guns were angled, calibrated so that every burst created maximum impact without wasting a single round. He watched as trenches filled with soldiers were decimated, as vehicles exploded one after another in a choreographed chaos that seemed almost impossible. The airfield, which intelligence had labeled heavily defended, was falling apart under the assault of a single plane. Bombs followed in a deadly rhythm. Jack had modified the release mechanism so that he could drop payloads in rapid succession, saturating the target with explosives faster than any normal bomber could. Crates of ammunition, fuel depots, and barracks were obliterated in seconds. The explosions shook the island, sending plumes of smoke and fire into the sky, marking the ground with devastation. From above, it looked like the very earth had split open in fury. But it wasn't just firepower that made this strike extraordinary, it was Jack's intuition. Every maneuver, every dive, every turn had been calculated in the hangar, tested and retested in his mind. He knew the weak points, the blind spots in the enemy's defenses, the exact places where his guns and bombs would cause the most damage. And as he guided the B-25 across the island, he could see the results of his planning. Anti-aircraft guns that should have shredded the plane were left smoking and useless. Soldiers on the ground were frozen in disbelief, trying to comprehend what seemed like an impossible attack. The destruction was methodical, yet chaotic. 1 minute, a line of barracks was reduced to splintered wood and twisted metal. The next, a fuel depot ignited in a massive fireball, lighting the morning sky with flames that could be seen for miles. Jack's mind was hyper-focused, almost detached, as he monitored his gauges, checked his guns, and lined up his next targets. In 15 minutes, the B-25 would inflict more damage than a squadron of bombers could achieve in an entire day. The Japanese soldiers had never seen anything like it. From their trenches, from their lookout towers, they could only watch in horror as one plane, one audacious, illegal machine, wiped out columns of troops, vehicles, and supplies. They had trained for air raids, drilled for bombings, prepared for every conceivable scenario, yet nothing could have prepared them for this. They didn't know the mechanic behind the controls, and they didn't know that his genius had bent the rules to create a weapon they couldn't stop. Amid the chaos, Jack remained eerily calm. He adjusted his altitude, carefully avoiding the last operational anti-aircraft positions while still keeping maximum firepower on target. Every maneuver was precise, every second accounted for. He knew he couldn't linger too long. Every extra moment in the sky increased the risk of being hit, but he also knew that every second counted in maximizing the destruction on the ground. By the time he leveled off for the final run, the airfield had been transformed into a scene of utter devastation. Smoke choked the sky, fires burned unchecked, and the ground trembled under the force of the bombs. Yet Jack wasn't done. The last set of barracks, the final line of vehicles, had to be neutralized. With steady hands, he guided the B-25 into position one final time. The guns unleashed their fury, and the bombs fell with surgical precision. By the time the plane banked away from the island, 15 minutes had passed, but the impact of those 15 minutes would echo for weeks, even months. When Jack finally eased the B-25 back toward the open ocean, he took a moment to look at the island from above. It was a wasteland. The airfield, that had been a fortified, bustling hub of enemy activity, was now reduced to rubble and fire. Intelligence later confirmed that over 3,000 Japanese soldiers had been killed or incapacitated in that single, meticulously executed strike. Supplies, vehicles, and defensive positions that would have taken a coordinated attack of dozens of bombers to destroy had been eliminated by one plane, flown by one man who refused to accept the limits set by regulations. Back at the base, word of the attack spread quickly. Pilots and mechanics alike whispered about the B-25 that had wrought unimaginable destruction. Officers were both horrified and amazed, unsure whether to commend Jack for his ingenuity or punish him for breaking every rule in the book. But for those who had witnessed the aftermath, there was no doubt this was a strike of extraordinary skill and audacity, something that would be remembered long after the war was over. What made the mission even more remarkable wasn't just the destruction, but the fact that the B-25 returned safely. The modifications that had made it a deadly offensive weapon also made it more resilient, allowing it to survive flak, gunfire, and the chaos of battle that would have downed any standard bomber. Jack had built a machine that was not just lethal, but survivable, a perfect balance of innovation, courage, and sheer mechanical genius. Even in the aftermath, as Jack quietly cleaned the guns and inspected the engines, he never sought recognition. He didn't care about medals or accolades. What mattered to him was that his work had saved lives of his own squadron, of the pilots who flew beside him and had struck a decisive blow against the enemy. The mechanics who had doubted him now looked on with newfound respect, realizing that genius sometimes comes in the form of defiance, risk, and relentless determination. By the end of that day, the legend of Jack Thompson's illegal B-25 spread across the Pacific theater. Soldiers and officers alike would tell stories of the bomber that had killed thousands in 15 minutes, of the mechanic who had dared to rewrite the rules, and of a single, extraordinary mission that defied logic, risked everything, and achieved the impossible. The smoke over the island was still rising when Jack Thompson's B-25 finally touched down on the runway. The engine's roar faded to a low hum, and the world seemed to exhale as if it had been holding its breath during those 15 minutes of relentless destruction. On the ground, the aftermath was staggering. The once bustling airfield was unrecognizable, reduced to craters, twisted metal, and smoldering fires. The silence that followed the chaos was almost deafening. Pilots and mechanics rushed toward the plane, eyes wide, mouths open, hardly able to believe what they had just witnessed. The reports came in fast. Over 3,000 enemy troops killed, hundreds of vehicles destroyed, supply depots annihilated. It was a number almost impossible to comprehend, a single mission that had achieved what entire squadrons had struggled to accomplish in weeks. And at the center of it all was one man, a mechanic who had risked everything to bend the rules, defy convention, and create a weapon that no one thought possible. Jack stepped out of the cockpit, his uniform streaked with grime, oil, and sweat. He wasn't thinking about the destruction, the headlines, or the whispers of legend forming around his name. He was thinking about the lives saved, the men in his own squadron who would not have to face the same devastating airfield under enemy fire, the pilots who would now have a fighting chance thanks to the chaos he had created. There was a quiet pride in his eyes, but also a calm humility. He had done what needed to be done. Commanders gathered around, faces a mixture of shock, awe, and fury. Some saw brilliance, others saw insubordination. Protocol had been broken, every regulation bent, and yet the results were undeniable. Jack had rewritten the rules of engagement without permission, and the consequences were immediate and staggering. In a room filled with military men trained to measure success in reports and charts, they were forced to measure it in fire, in ruin, in numbers that defied belief. News of the attack spread like wildfire through the Pacific theater. Soldiers in distant bases talked in hushed tones about the B-25 that had leveled an entire airfield in mere minutes. Pilots studied flight paths, mechanics examined diagrams, and commanders debated how to replicate or prevent such devastation. But what truly set this mission apart was not the destruction alone. It was the audacity, the courage, and the ingenuity that had made it possible. Jack, however, remained quietly in the background. He didn't seek credit. Fame had never been his goal. To him, the B-25 was not a machine to boast about. It was a tool, an extension of his own mind and skill. Every welded plate, every modified gun, every jury-rigged mechanism was a testament to preparation, precision, and the willingness to take risks no one else would. And yet, despite the secrecy, the whispers of his accomplishment began to grow into legend. Over time, the story reached historians, pilots, and civilians alike. They told of a single bomber, modified in secret by a mechanic who defied orders, striking fear into the enemy and changing the course of a battle. They spoke of Jack Thompson, the man who had turned a standard aircraft into a weapon capable of eliminating thousands in 15 minutes. And while some questioned the legality and others debated the ethics, no one could deny the impact. He had done what no one thought possible, and the results were there for the world to see. Yet the true measure of Jack's achievement was not in the numbers, the explosions, or the medals he never claimed. It was in the principle he demonstrated, that one person, armed with ingenuity, courage, and skill, could alter the course of events on a scale many believed impossible. It was a lesson in daring, in seeing beyond limitations, in refusing to accept the ordinary when the extraordinary was within reach. In the months and years that followed, the modified B-25 became a symbol not of rebellion, but of the power of human creativity in the midst of war. Pilots who flew alongside it remembered the terror it inspired in the enemy. Mechanics who worked in hangars far from the front lines spoke of the inspiration it provided. And historians would later write that while battles are won with strategy, courage, and numbers, sometimes they are also won by those willing to see a machine not as it is, but as it could be. Jack returned to the quiet routine of the base, the hum of engines, and the smell of oil. He went back to repairing aircraft, helping pilots, and adjusting machines, but he never forgot the 15 minutes that had changed everything. And though he never sought recognition, the legend of his illegal B-25 continued to grow, whispered among those who understood the rare combination of skill, bravery, and ingenuity that it took to make the impossible happen. In the end, it wasn't just a story about a bomber or a mechanic, it was a story about daring to break the rules, about vision, about the courage to act when the world tells you it's impossible. It was a story that reminded everyone that in the crucible of war, extraordinary acts often come from unexpected places, from those willing to take a risk when others only follow orders. And in the case of Jack Thompson and his modified B-25, that risk had forever etched his name into history, proving that one man with a wrench, a plan, and unshakable determination could unleash destruction and alter the course of a battle in a mere 15 minutes. The Pacific would never forget that morning. The enemy would never forget the terror of a single B-25 that tore through their defenses like a storm. And those who served alongside Jack would carry the memory of his audacity, ingenuity, and courage for the rest of their lives, a reminder that sometimes the smallest sparks of rebellion can ignite the most powerful fires.